Illuminati Project Memo Number 10, dated July 28th to J.M. On the origin of the pyramid and eye symbol, test your credulity on the following yarn from Flying Saucers in the Bible by Virginia Brasington, Saucerian Books, 1963, page 43. To quote, the Continental Congress had asked Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams to arrange for a seal for the United States of America. None of the designs they created or which were submitted to them were suitable. Fairly late at night, after working on the project all day, Jefferson walked out into the cool night air of the garden to clear his mind. In a few minutes, he rushed back into the room crying jubilantly, I have it! I have it! Indeed, he did have some plans in his hands. They were the plans showing the Great Seal as we know it today. Asked how he got the plans, Jefferson told a strange story. A man approached him wearing a black cloak that practically covered him, face and all, and told him that he, the stranger, knew they were trying to devise a seal, and that he had a design which was appropriate and meaningful. After the excitement died down, the three went into the garden to find the stranger, but he was gone. Thus, neither these founding fathers nor anybody else ever knew who really designed the Great Seal of the United States. Signed, Pat. Illuminati Project Memo Number 11, dated July 29th, to J.M. The latest I found on the Iron Pyramid is in a San Francisco underground paper, Planet, San Francisco, July 1969, Volume 1, Number 4, suggesting it as a symbol for Timothy Leary's political party when he was running for governor of California instead of just running. To quote, the emblem is a tentative design for the party's campaign button. One wag suggests that everyone cut out the circle from the back of a dollar bill and send the holy dollar to Governor Leary so he can wallpaper his office with them. Then paste the emblem on your front door to signify your membership in the party. Translations. The year of the beginning, new secular order. Both translations are wrong, of course. Annuit coeptus means he blesses our beginning, and Novus Ordo Seclorum means a new order of the ages. Oh well, scholarship was never the hippie's strong point. But Tim Leary, an Illuminatus? In pasting the eye on the door, I can't help but think of the Hebrews marking their doorways with the blood of the Lamb so that the angel of death would pass by their houses. Signed, Pat. Illuminati Project Memo Number 12, to J.M., dated August 3rd. I finally found the basic book on the Illuminati, Proofs of a Conspiracy by John Robeson, Christian Book Club of America, Hawthorne, California, 1961, originally published in 1801. Robeson was an English Mason who discovered through personal experience that the French Masonic lodges, such as the Grand Orient, were Illuminati fronts and were the main instigators of the French Revolution. His whole book is very explicit about how Weishaupt worked. Every infiltrated Masonic group would have several levels, like an ordinary Masonic lodge. But as candidates advanced through the various degrees, they would be told more about the real purposes of the movement. Those at the bottom simply thought they were Masons. In the middle levels, they knew they were engaged in a great project to change the world, but the exact nature of the change was explained to them according to what the leaders thought they were prepared to know. Only those at the top knew the secret, which, according to Robeson, is this. The Illuminati aims to overthrow all government and religion, setting up an anarcho-communist free-love world, and, because the end justifies the means, a principle Weishaupt acquired from his Jesuit youth, they didn't care how many people they killed to accomplish that noble purpose. Robeson knows nothing of earlier Illuminati movements, but does say specifically that the Bavarian Illuminati was not destroyed by the government's crackdown in 1785, but was, in fact, still active, both in England and France and possibly elsewhere, when he wrote in 1801. On page 116, Robeson lists their existing lodges as follows. Germany, 84 lodges. England, 8 lodges. Scotland, 2 lodges. Warsaw, 2 lodges. Switzerland, many. Rome, Naples, Ancona, Florence, France, Holland, Dresden, 4. United States of America, several. On page 101, he mentions that there are 13 ranks in the order. This may account for the 13 steps on their symbolic pyramid. Page 84 gives the code name to Weishaupt, I don't know how to say his name, which was Spartacus. His second in command, Friar Niga, had the code name Philo. Page 117. This is revealed in papers seized by the Bavarian government in a raid on the home of a lawyer named Zwack, who had the code named Cato. Maybe Cato. Babeuf, the French revolutionary, evidently took the name of Gracchus in imitation of the classic style of these titles. Robeson's conclusion, page 269, is worth quoting. To quote, "Nothing is as dangerous as a mystic association, the object remaining a secret in the hands of the managers. The rest simply put a ring in their own noses, by which they may be led about at pleasure. And still, painting after the secret, they are the more pleased the less they see." Signed, Pat. At the bottom of the page was a note in pencil, scrawled with a decisive masculine hand. It said, "In the beginning was the Word, and it was written by a baboon." Illuminati Project, memo number 13, dated August 5th, to J.M. The survival of the Bavarian Illuminati throughout the 19th century and into the 20th is the subject of World Revolution by Nestor Webster, Constable and Company, London, 1921. Mrs. Webster follows Robeson fairly closely on the early days of the movement, up to the French Revolution, but then veers off and says that the Illuminati never intended to create their utopian anarcho-communist society. That was just another of their masks. Their real purpose was dictatorship over the world, and so they soon formed a secret alliance with the Prussian government. All subsequent socialist, anarchist, and communist movements are mere decoys, she argues, behind which the German general staff and the Illuminati are plotting to overthrow other governments, so Germany can conquer them. She wrote right after England fought Germany in the First World War. I see no way of reconciling this with the Bircher's thesis that the Illuminati has become a front for the Rhodes Scholars to take over the world for English domination. Obviously, as Robeson states, the Illuminati say different things to different people to get them into the conspiracy. As for the links which modern communism, here are some passages from our pages 234 to 45. To quote, "But now that the First Internationale was dead, it became necessary for the secret societies to reorganize, and it is at this crisis that we find the formidable sect springing to life again, the original Illuminati of Weishaupt. What we do know definitely is that the society was refounded in Dresden in 1880. That it was consciously modeled on its 18th century predecessor is clear from the fact that its chief, one Leopold Engel, was the author of a lengthy panegyric on Weishaupt and his order entitled Geschichte des Illuminaten Ordens, published in 1906. In London, a lodge called by the same name carried on the rite of Memphis, founded, it is said, by Cagliostro on Egyptian models, and initiated adepts into Illuminized Freemasonry. Was it a mere coincidence that in July 1889, an International Socialist Congress decided that May 1st, which was the day on which Weishaupt founded the Illuminati, should be chosen for an annual international labor demonstration? Signed, Pat. Illuminati Project, memo number 14, dated August 6, 2JM. And here's still another version of the origin of the Illuminati from the Kabbalist Eliphas Levi, The History of Magic by Eliphas Levi, Borden Publishing Company, Los Angeles, 1963, page 65. He says there were two Zoroasters, a true one who taught white right-hand magic and a false one who taught black left-hand magic. He goes on to quote, "To the false Zoroaster must be referred the cultus of material fire and that impious doctrine of divine dualism which produced at a later period the monstrous gnosis of Manes and the false principles of spurious masonry. The Zoroaster in question was the father of that materialized magic which led to the massacre of the Magi and brought their true doctrine at first into proscription and then oblivion. Ever inspired by the spirit of truth, the church was forced to condemn, under the names of magic, Manichaeism, Illuminism, and Masonry, all that was in kinship, remote or approximate, with the primitive profanation of the mysteries. One signal example is the history of the Knights Templar, which has been misunderstood to this day." Levi does not elucidate that last sentence. It is interesting, however, that Nesta Webster, see Member 13, also trace the Illuminati to the Knights Templar, whereas Darul and most other sources track them eastward to the Hashishim. And all this making me paranoid? I'm beginning to get the impression that the evidence has not only been hidden in obscure books, but also made confusing and contradictory to discourage the researcher. Signed, Pat. Scrawled on the bottom of this memo was a series of jottings in the same masculine hand, Malik's, Saul guessed, that had jotted the baboon references on memo number 12. The jottings said, "Check on order of Demolay, 11-fold Demolay cross, 11 intersections, therefore 22 lines. The 22nd Atus of Tahuti, why not 23? TARO equals TORA equals TROA equals ATOR equals ROTA! Exclamation, question. Abdul Aharazan equals A. Oh, Christ, Barney groaned. Oh, Mary and Joseph, oh shit. We'll end up either become mystics or going crazy before this case is over. Is there any difference? The Order of Demolay is a Masonic society for boys, Saul commented helpfully. I don't know what the Aedes of Tahuti are, but that sounds Egyptian. Tarot, usually spelled T-A-R-O-T, is the deck of cards gypsy fortune tellers use. And the word gypsy means Egyptian. Torah is the law in Hebrew. We keep coming back to something that has roots in both Jewish mysticism and Egyptian magic. The Knights Templar were kicked out of the church, Barney said, for trying to combine Christian and Muslim ideas. Last year, my brother, the Jesuit, gave a lecture about how modern ideas are just old heresies from the Middle Ages warmed over. I had to go for politeness' sake. I remember something else he said about the Templars. They were engaged in what he called unnatural sex acts. In other words, they were gay. Do you get the impression that all these groups related to the Illuminati are all male? Maybe the big secret they're hiding so fanatically is that they're all some vast worldwide homosexual plot. I've heard showbiz people complain about what they call the Homintern, a homo organization that tries to keep all the best jobs for other fruits. How does that sound? Sounds plausible, Saul said ironically. But it also sounds plausible to say the Illuminati is a Jewish conspiracy, a Catholic conspiracy, a Masonic conspiracy, a communist conspiracy, a banker's conspiracy, and I suppose we'll eventually find evidence to suggest it's an interplanetary scheme masterminded from Mars or Venus. Don't you see, Barney? Whatever they're really up to, they keep creating masks so all sorts of scapegoat groups will get the blame for being the real Illuminati. He shook his head dismally. They're smart enough to know they can't operate indefinitely without a few people eventually realizing something's there. So they've taken that into account and arranged for an inquisitive outsider to get all sorts of wrong ideas about who they are. They're dogs, Muldoon said. Intelligent talking dogs from the Dog Star Sirius. They came here and ate Malik, just like they ate that guy in Kansas City, except that time they didn't get to finish the job. He turned back and read from Memo 8. With his throat torn as if by the talons of some enormous beast, no animal was reported missing from any of the local zoos. He grinned. Lord God, I'm almost ready to believe it. They're werewolves, Saul answered, grinning also. The Pentagon is the symbol of the werewolf. Look at the Late Late Show sometime. That's the pentagram, not the Pentagon. Barney lit a cigarette, adding, This is really getting on our nerves, isn't it? Saul looked up wearily and glanced around the apartment, almost as if he were looking for its absent owner. Joseph Malik, he said aloud, what can of worms have you opened? And how far back does it go? We shall not be moved. In fact, for Joseph Malik, the beginning was several years earlier in a medley of tear gas, hymn singing, billy clubs, and obscenity, all of which were provoked by the imminent nomination for president of a man named Hubert Horatio Humphrey. It began in Lincoln Park on the night of August 25th, 1968, while Joe was waiting to be tear gassed. He did not know then that anything was beginning. He was only conscious in an acid gut sour way of what was ending, his own faith in the Democratic Party. He was sitting with the concerned clergyman under the cross they had erected. He was thinking bitterly that they should have erected a tombstone instead. It should have said, "Here lies the New Deal." Here lies the belief that all evil is on the other side, among the reactionaries and Ku Kluxers. Here lies 20 years of the hopes and dreams and sweat and blood of Joseph Wendell Malik. Here lies American liberalism, clubbed to death by Chicago's heroic peace officers. "They're coming," a voice near him said suddenly. The concerned clergyman immediately began singing, "We shall not be moved." "We'll be moved, all right," a dry, sardonic W.C. Fields voice said quietly. "When the tear gas hits, we'll be moved." Joe recognized the speaker. It was novelist William Burroughs with his usual poker face, utterly without anger or contempt or indignation or hope or faith or any emotion Joe could understand. But he sat there, making his own protest against Hubert Horatio Humphrey by placing his body in front of Chicago's police for reasons Joe could not understand. How Joe wondered, how can a man have courage without faith, without belief? Burroughs believed in nothing, and yet there he sat stubborn as Luther. Joe had always had faith in something. Roman Catholicism, long ago, then Trotskyism at college, then for nearly 2 decades, mainstream liberalism. Arthur Schlesinger Jr.'s Vital Center. And now, with that dead, he was trying desperately to summon up faith in the motley crowd of dope and astrology-obsessed yippies, black Maoists, old-line hardcore pacifists, and arrogantly dogmatic SDS kids who had come to Chicago to protest a rigged convention and were being beaten and brutalized unspeakably for it. Allen Ginsberg, sitting amid a huddle of yippies off to the right, began chanting again, as he had all evening. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Ginsberg believed. He believed in everything. In democracy, in socialism, in communism, in anarchism, anarchism, in Ezra Pound's idealist variety of fascist economics, in Buckminster Fuller's technological utopia, in D.H. Lawrence's return to pre-industrial pastoralism, and in Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Voodooism, astrology, magic, but above all, in the natural goodness of man. The natural goodness of man. Joe hadn't fully believed in that since Buchenwald was revealed to the world in 1944 when he was 17. Kill, 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 came the chant of the police, exactly like the night before, the same Neolithic scream of rage that signaled the beginning of the first massacre. They were coming, clubs in hand, spraying the tear gas before them. Kill, kill, kill. Auschwitz, USA, Joe thought, sickened. If they had been issued Zyklon B along with the tear gas and mace, they would be using it just as happily. Slowly, the concerned clergymen came to their feet, holding dampened handkerchiefs to their faces. Unarmed and helpless, they prepared to hold their ground as long as possible before the inevitable retreat. A moral victory, Joe thought bitterly. All we ever achieve are moral victories. The immoral brutes win the real victories. All hail Discordia, said a voice among the clergymen. A bearded young man named Simon, who had been arguing in favor of anarchism against some SDS Maoists earlier in that day. And that was the last sentence Joe Malik remembered clearly, for it was gas and clubs and screams and blood from then on. He had no way of guessing at the time that hearing that sentence was the most important thing that happened to him in Lincoln Park. Harry Coyne curls his long body into a knot of tension, resting on his elbows and sighting the Remington rifle carefully as the motorcade passes the book depository and heads towards his perch on the triple underpass. He could see Bernard Barker from the CIA down on the grassy knoll. If he carried this off right, they promised him more jobs. It would be the end of petty crime for him, the beginning of big-time money. In a way, he was sorry. Kennedy seemed like a nice enough young fellow. Harry would like to make it with both him and that hot-looking wife of his at the same time. But money talks, and sentiment is only for fools. He released the bolt action, ignoring the sudden barking of a dog, and took aim. Just as the 3 shots resounded from the grassy knoll. Jesus motherfucking Christ, he said, and then he caught the glint of the rifle in the book depository window. Great God Almighty, how the fuck many of us are down here? He cried out, scampering to his feet and starting to run. It was almost a year after being clubbed, June 22nd, 1969, that Joe returned to Chicago to witness another rigged convention, to suffer further disillusionment, to meet Simon once more, and to hear the mysterious phrase, "All hail Discordia," again. The convention this time was the last ever held by the Students for a Democratic Society, and from the first hour after it opened, Joe realized the Progressive Labor faction had stacked all the cards in advance. It was a Democratic Party all over again, and it would have been equally bloody if the PL boys had their own police force to, quote-unquote, deal with the dissenters known then as RYM-I and RYM-2. Lacking that factor, the smoldering violence remained purely verbal, but when it was all over, another part of Joe Malik was dead, and his faith in the natural goodness of man was eroded still further. And so he found himself aimlessly searching for something that was not totally corrupt, attending the anarchist caucus at the old Wobbly Hall on North Halstead Street. Joe knew nothing about anarchism, except that several famous anarchists, Parsons and spies of Chicago's Haymarket riot in 1888, Sacco and Vanzetti in Massachusetts, and the Wobbly's own poet laureate, Joe Hill, had been executed for murders which they apparently hadn't really committed. Beyond that, anarchists wanted to abolish government, a proposition so evidently absurd that Joe had never bothered, excuse me, to read any of their theoretical or polemical works. Now, however, eating the maggoty meal of his growing disillusionment with every conventional approach to politics, he began to listen to the Wobblies and other anarchists with acute curiosity. After all, the words of his favorite fictional hero, when you have eliminated all other possibilities, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true. The anarchists, Joe found, were not going to quit SDS. We'll stay in and do some righteous ass kicking, one of them said, to the applause and cheers of the others. Beyond that, however, they seemed to be in a welter of ideological disagreement. Gradually, he began to identify the conflicting positions expressed. The individualist anarchists, who sounded like right-wing Republicans, except that they wanted to get rid of all functions of government. The anarcho-syndicalists and Wobblies, who sounded like Marxists, except that they wanted to get rid of all functions of government. The anarcho-pacifists, who sounded like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, except that they wanted to get rid of all functions of government. And a group who were dubbed, rather affectionately, the Crazies, whose position was utterly unintelligible. Simon was among the Crazies. In a speech that Joe followed only with difficulty, Simon declared that cultural revolution was more important than political revolution, that Bugs Bunny should be adopted as a symbol of anarchists everywhere, that Hoffman's discovery of LSD in 1943 was a manifestation of direct intervention by God in human affairs, that the nomination of the boar hog Pegasus for president of the United States by the Yippies had been the most, quote, transcendentally lucid, quote, unquote, political act of the 20th century, and that mass orgies of pot smoking and fucking on every street corner was the most practical next step in liberating the world from tyranny. He also urged deep study of the tarot to fight the real enemy with their own weapons, whatever that meant. He was launching into a peroration about the mystic significance of the number 23, pointing out that 2 plus 3 equals 5, the pentad within which the devil can be invoked, as for example in a pentacle or at the Pentagon building in Washington, while 2 divided by 3 equals 0.666, the number of the beast, according to that freaked out revelation of St. John the Mushroom Head. That 23 itself was present esoterically because of its conspicuous exoteric absence in the number series represented by the Wobbly Hall address, which was 2422 North Halstead, and that the dates of the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Lee Harvey Oswald, November 22nd and 24, also had a conspicuous 23 absent in between them. When he finally was shouted down, the conversation returned to a more mundane level. Half in whimsy and half in despair, Joe decided to perform one of his chronic acts of faith and convince himself, at least for a while, that while there was some kind of meaning to Simon's ramblings, did I get that right? Yeah. His equally chronic skepticism, he knew, would soon enough reassert itself. What the world calls sanity has led us to the present planetary crises, Simon had said. And insanity is the only viable alternative. That was a paradox worth some kind of consideration. About that 23, Joe said, approaching Simon tentatively after the meeting broke up. It's everywhere, was the instant reply. I just started to scratch the surface. All the great anarchists died on the 23rd day of some month or other. Sacco and Vanzetti on August 23rd, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow on May 23rd, Dutch on October 23rd, and Vince Cole was 23 years old when he was shot on 23rd Street. And even though John Dillinger died on the 22nd of July, if you look it up, like I did, in Toland's book, The Dillinger Days, you'll find he couldn't get away from the 23rd principle, because 23 other people died that night in Chicago, too, all from heat prostration. Nova heat coming in, dig? And the world began on October 23rd in 4004 BC, according to Bishop Usher, and the Hungarian Revolution started on October 23rd, too, and Harpo Marx was born on November 23rd, and there is more of it, much more, and Joe patiently listened to all of it, determined to continue his experiment in applied schizophrenia, at least for this one evening. They retired to a nearby restaurant, the Seminary, on Fullerton Street, and Simon rambled on, over beers, proceeding to the mystic significance of the letter W, 23rd in the alphabet, and its presence in the words women and womb, as well as in the shape of the feminine breasts and spread-eagle legs of the copulating female. He even found some mystic meaning in the W in Washington, but was strangely evasive about explicating this. So you see, Simon was explaining when the restaurant was starting to close, the whole key to liberation is magic. Anarchism remains tied to politics and remains a form of death like all other politics, until it breaks free from the defined reality of capitalist society and creates its own reality. A pig for president, acid in the water supply, fucking in the streets, making the totally impossible become the eternally possible. Reality is thermoplastic, not thermosetting, you know. I mean, you can reprogram it much more than people realize. The hex hoax, original sin, logical positivism, those restrictions and construction myths, all that's based on a thermosetting reality. Christ, man, there are limits, of course. Nobody is nutty enough to deny that, but the limits are nowhere near as rigid as we've been taught to believe. It's much closer to the truth to say that there are no practical limits at all, and reality is whatever people decide to make it. But we've been on one restriction kick after another for a couple thousand years now, the world's longest head trip, and it takes real negative entropy to shake up the foundations. This isn't shit. I've got a degree in mathematics, man. Well, I studied engineering myself a long time ago, Joe said. I realize that part of what you say is true. It's all true. The land belongs to the landlords right now because of magic. People worship the deeds in the government offices, and they won't dare move onto a square of ground if one of the deeds says somebody else owns it. It's a head trip, a kind of magic, and you need the opposite magic to lift the curse. You need shock elements to break up and disorganize the chains of command in the brain, the mind-forged manacles that Blake wrote about. That's the unpredictable elements, dads. The erratic, the erotic, the heuristic. Tim Leary said it. People have to go out of their minds before they can come to their senses. They can't feel and touch and smell the real earth, man, as long as the manacles in the cortex tell them it belongs to somebody else. If you don't want to call it magic, call it counter-conditioning, but the principle is the same. Breaking up the trip society laid on us and starting our own trip. Bringing back old realities that are supposed to be dead, creating new realities, astrology, demons, lifting poetry off of the written page into the acts of your daily life. Surrealism, dig? Antonin Artaud and Andre Breton put it in a nutshell in the first Surrealist Manifesto. Total transformation of mind and all that resembles it. They knew all about the Illuminated Lodge, founded in Munich in 1923, and that it controlled Wall Street and Hitler and Stalin through witchcraft. We got to get into witchcraft ourselves to undo the hex they've cast on everybody's mind. All hail Discordia. Do you read me? When they finally parted and Joe headed back for his hotel, the spell ended. I've been listening to a spaced-out acid head all night, Joe thought in his cab headed south toward the loop, and almost managing to believe him. If I keep on with this little experiment, I will believe him, and that's how insanity always begins. You find reality unbearable and start manufacturing a fantasy alternative. With an effort of will, he forced himself back into his usual framework. No matter how cruel reality was, Joe Malik would face it and would not follow the yippies and crazies in the joyride to cloud cuckoo land. But when he arrived at his hotel door and noticed for the first time that he had room 23, he had to fight the impulse to call Simon on the phone and tell him about the latest invasion of surrealism into the real world. and he lay awake in his bed for hours, remembering 23s that had occurred in his own life, and wondering about the origin of that mysterious bit of 1929 slang, 23 skidoo. After being lost for an hour in Hitler's old neighborhood, Clark Kent and his Superman finally found Ludwigstrasse and got out of Munich. About 40 miles and we'll be in Ingolstadt, Kent Mohammed Pearson said. At last, one of the Supermen groaned. Just then, a tiny Volkswagen inched past their VW bus like an infant running ahead of its mother, and Kent looked bemused. Did you check out that cat at the wheel? I saw him once before and never forgot it because he was acting so weird. It was in Mexico City. Funny seeing him again halfway around the world and umpteen years later. Go catch him, another Superman commented. With the AMA and the Trashers and other heavy groups were going to get buried alive. Let's make sure that at least he knows we were in Ingolstadt for this gig. Just like a tree that's standing by the water. The morning after the wobbly meeting, Simon telephoned Joe. Listen, he asked, do you have to fly back to New York today? Can you possibly stay over a night? I've got something I'd like you to see. It's time we started reaching people in your generation and really showing you instead of just telling you. Are you game? And Joe Malik, ex-Trotskyist, ex-engineering student, ex-liberal, ex-Catholic, heard himself saying yes, and heard a louder voice, unspeaking, uttering a more profound yes deep inside himself. He was gang for astrology, for I Ching, for LSD, for demons, for whatever Simon had to offer as an alternative to the world of sane and rational men who were sanely and rationally plotting their course toward what could only be the annihilation of the planet. We shall not be moved. God is dead, the priest chanted. God is dead, the congregation repeated in chorus. God is dead. We are all absolutely free, the priest intoned more rhythmically. God is dead. The congregation picked up the almost hypnotic beat. We are all absolutely free. Joe shifted nervously in his chair. The blasphemy was exhilarating, but also strangely disturbing. He wondered how much fear of hell still lingered in the back corridors of his skull, left over from his Catholic boyhood. They were in an elegant apartment, high above Lakeshore Drive. We always meet here, Simon had explained, because of the acrostic significance of the street name, and the sounds of the automobile traffic far below mingled strangely with the preparations for what Joe already guessed was a black mass. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, the priest chanted. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, Joe repeated with the rest of the congregation. The priest, who was the only one who had not removed his clothes before the beginning of the ceremony, was a slightly red-faced middle-aged man in a Roman collar, and part of Joe's discomfort derived from the fact that he looked so much like every Catholic priest he had known in his childhood. It had not helped matters that he had given his name when Simon introduced Joe to him as Padre Pederastia, which he pronounced with a very campy inflection, looking flirtatiously directly in Joe's eyes. The congregation divided, in Joe's mind, into two easily distinguishable groups. Poor, full-time hippies from the Old Town area and rich, part-time hippies from Lakeshore Drive itself, no doubt, and also from the local advertising agencies on Michigan Avenue. There were only 11 of them, however, including Joe, and Padre Pederastia made 12. Where was the traditional 13th? Prepare the pintad, Padre Pederastia commanded. Simon and a rather good-looking young female, both quite unself-conscious in their nakedness, arose and left the group, walking toward the door which Joe had assumed led to the bedroom area. They stopped to take some chalk from a table on which hashish and sandalwood incense were burning in a goat's head taper, then squatted to draw a large pentagon on the blood-red rug. A triangle was then added to each side of the pentagon, forming a star, the special kind of star. Joe knew, which was known as pentagram, symbol of werewolves and also of demons. He found himself remembering the corny old poem from the Lon Chaney Jr. movies, but it suddenly didn't sound like kitsch anymore. Even a man who is pure of heart and says his prayers at night can turn to a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. I, the priest chanted rapidly. I, the chorus came. I, vo, the chant rose weirdly. I, vo, the rhythmic reply came in cadence. Joe felt a strange, ashy, acrid taste gathering in his mouth, and the coldness creeping into his toes and fingers. The air, too, seemed suddenly greasy and unpleasantly, mucidly moist. I, vo, he, the priest screamed, in fear or in ecstasy. I, vo, he. Joe heard himself joining the others. Was it imagination, or were all the voices subtly and changing in a bestial and pongoid fashion? O son of Veorsaji, the priest said more softly. O son of Veorsaji, they chorused. It is accomplished, the priest said. We may pass the guardian. The congregation arose and moved toward the door. Each person, Joe noticed, was careful to step into the pentagram and pause there a moment, gathering strength before actually approaching the door. When it was his turn, he discovered why. The carving on the door, which he seemed merely obscene and ghoulish from across the room, was more disturbing when you were closer to it. It was not easy to convince yourself that those eyes were just a trick of trompe-l'oeil. French word. The mind insisted on feeling that they very definitely looked at you, not affectionately, as you passed. This thing was the guardian, which had to be pacified before they could enter the next room. Joe's fingers and toes were definitely freezing, and autosuggestion didn't seem a very plausible explanation. He seriously wondered about the possibility of frostbite. But then he stepped into the pentagram, and the cold suddenly decreased. The eyes of the guardian were less menacing, and a feeling of renewed energy flowed through his body, such as he had experienced in a sensitivity training session after he had been cajoled by the leader into unleashing a great deal of pent-up anxiety and rage by kicking, screaming, weeping, and cursing. He passed the guardian easily and entered the room where the real action would occur. It was as if he had left the 20th century. The furnishings and the very architecture were Hebraic, Arabic, and medieval European, all mixed together in a most disorienting way, and entirely unrelieved by any trace of the modern or functional. A black draped altar stood in the center, and upon it lay the 13th member of the coven. She was a woman with red hair and green eyes, the traits which Satan supposedly relished most in mortal females. There had been a time, Joe remembered, when any woman having those features was automatically suspected of witchcraft. She was, of course, naked, and her body would be the medium through which this strange sacrament would be attempted. What am I doing here? Joe thought frantically. Why don't I leave these lunatics and get back to the world I know? The world where all the horrors are, after all, merely human. But he knew the answer. He could not, literally could not, attempt to pass the guardian until all those present gave their consent. Padre Pederastia was speaking. This part of the ceremony, he said, camping outrageously, is very distasteful to me, as you all know. If only our Father below would allow us to substitute a boy on the altar when I'm officiating. But alas, he is, as we all know, very rigid about such things. As usual, therefore, I will ask the newest member to take my place for this rite.